Okay, welcome to part 3 of chapter 10, looking at externalities. And in this section, we look at public policies towards externalities. In other words, what can the government do to correct for these externalities? So there's two main ways of doing it. And as you can see from the slide here, one is called command and control policies. And in this one, the government directly regulates the behavior of companies. And number two is called market-based. And here, the government says you can still do whatever it is you're doing, but you're going to have to pay for the privilege of doing that thing. And these usually come in the form of taxes, or if in the case that you want to actually subsidize the behavior, a subsidy. Um, and another way is called tradable pollution permits, or some of you may have heard of the term cap and trade. That would be under tradable pollution permits. Okay, let's explore regulation, and here we go. And regulation is, on the part of the government, regulates behavior directly, makes certain behaviors either required or forbidden. Now, it's impossible to eradicate pollution entirely, but um, you can limit it. And in the United States, it is the Environmental Protection Agency, otherwise known as the EPA, that is the enforcement arm for regulatory policies in the United States. And so the EPA develops and enforces regulation, dictates a maximum level of pollution, requires that firms adopt a particular technology to reduce emissions. In the case of a coal plant, you might require the operator of the coal plant to have a coal scrubber so that the air coming out from the coal plant is not nearly as dirty as it might be. Now, on the other hand, corrective taxes and subsidies. This is a tax specifically on the polluting activity to, as it says here, to induce that private decision maker to take account of the social costs that arise from a negative externality. Literally places a price on the right to pollute. And the goal is to reduce pollution at a lower cost to society, so you don't go through the regulatory expense. It does raise revenue for the government, and it does enhance economic efficiency in that you're taking into consideration the cost of your behavior upon others. Now, an example that we all have seen on a daily basis is smoking. And policy towards smoking has been both regulation and taxation. So in the case of Windward Community College or most any school, you cannot smoke in the classroom. You cannot smoke within 100 feet of the classroom. As a matter of fact, there's just specific areas where you can indeed smoke. And so that would be regulation. Taxation would be the government putting a charge on every cigarette that would go to the government as a specific tax, with the idea that people would smoke less given a higher tax. Okay, so now we consider gasoline again. And gasoline and driving imposes certainly negative externalities: congestion, accidents, and pollution. Here we have a cartoon that kind of shows a little bit of hypocrisy here. And the person who looks like an economist says, I have a plan to reduce dependency on oil imports. And the hippie type person says, no blood for oil, and cut wasteful consumption, ban SUVs. And he or she said, the person says, lower greenhouse emissions, promote alternative fuel. The hippie is very, very happy indeed, but the economist then says, here's your price of gasoline, $3.49 a gallon. And the hippie turns right around and wants to lynch the economists because we, everybody wants to drive. Okay, so things to deal with negative externalities are oftentimes not particularly popular. And the gas tax is a corrective tax. It doesn't cause deadweight losses, does make the economy get better, less traffic congestion, safer road, cleaner environment. And most states have a form of gasoline tax for exactly this purpose. Now, I should state, however, that the gasoline tax also is used to build roads and highways as well. Okay, so now how high should the gasoline tax be? That's a really good question. In 2007, one proposal was a $2.78 per gallon tax in 2012 dollars. Now, the actual tax in the US in 2015 is only 50 cents. So, in order to really do something about the impact of cars on congestion, pollution, and the like, the tax should be much higher. But then again, how popular would that action be? Now, there are some cities that actually have a congestion pricing. So, to an additional, shall we say, tax upon the privilege of driving into a central city. Such examples are London and Singapore and hopefully, not hopefully, but maybe New York City by the time you're hearing this this particular talk of mine. And the idea there is you in essence put a toll, some kind of a toll on the ability to drive. You still can drive, but you're just going to have to pay a much higher price for the privilege, and that toll can be changed given how busy the central area is. So maybe during the day the tax would be a little higher than in the evening or on weekends. And now, tax revenue from a gas tax, as it says here, used to lower taxes to net distort incentives and cause deadweight losses, and maybe perhaps it might not be necessary to have fuel efficient cars, although I have a hard time believing that one. Okay, where are we going here? Carbon taxes. So here's a statement on Us Economists. Brookings Institute recently described a U.S. carbon tax of $20 a ton, increasing at 4% a year, which would raise an estimated $150 billion a year in federal revenues over the next decade. Given the negative externalities created by carbon dioxide emissions, a federal carbon tax at this rate would involve fewer harmful net distortions than a tax increase that generated the same revenue by raising marginal tax rates on labor income across the board. And yes, we did agree that a simple carbon tax would be much more efficient and would get the job done. And we definitely agree that taxes are more efficient than straight off regulation. Because with regulation, you would have to, in essence, hire a bureaucracy. With taxation, you would just charge that tax, and then see if the person is paying the tax or not. And here we go on carbon taxes again. And this is a statement that's saying a tax on the carbon content of fuel would be a less expensive way to reduce carbon dioxide emissions than would a collection of policies for requirements. And yes, indeed, we would agree on that. Taxation is much more efficient way to correct for negative externalities. Okay, another type of public policy is called a tradable pollution permit. And here you are giving the person the right to pollute, but now you're going to have to pay for that privilege to pollute. So it's a market. So a new market is created to trade these things called pollution permits. And the government can set the number of pollution permits for the desired amount of quantity to be tolerated, and then the companies would trade these permits amongst each other. Now, there will be some persons who already have a technology to produce, and they can produce it at a lower cost, and others can only reduce it at a higher cost. So in essence, what would be going on is those who have the those who have the low cost can sell their permits to those who have the high cost. And in this way, a firm again is paying for the right to pollute. And ultimately, you get the same efficient final allocation as with the taxation. So just to review a little bit, if you have pollution using permits or corrective taxes, for corrective taxes you're paying to the government, and for permits you're paying to buy permits. And in both cases you are internalizing the externality of pollution. And we can see on a graph for corrective tax, what is held constant is the price. And for permits, what is held constant is the quantity. But in both cases, you will get the same reduction in pollution just by two different ways of doing it. Most economists do still argue for a tax as opposed to a permit. But many countries around the world are experimenting with permits and or cap and trade. I know Europe is doing that, and California, I think, is doing that as well for some types of pollution. Okay, so there are, of course, objections to the economic analysis. One is, and I assume this person is a liberal, we cannot give anyone the option of polluting for a fee. And just the basic idea that people face trade-offs. Eliminating all pollution is impossible. We would literally be going back to the Stone Age, as it were. So it's a reduction, not total elimination. And for clean water and clean air, there's an opportunity cost as well, and that opportunity cost is a lower standard of living. Also, we got to keep in mind that clean environment is a normal good. So those countries who have more income, they can afford a cleaner environment. And also clean water and clean air is subject to the law of demand. The lower the price of environmental protection, the more the public will want it. Okay, this finishes up part 3, and we, I believe, have one more part to go.